All right, why don't we get started? Last week, Albert did Dorothy Day, presented Dorothy Day, and he's going to be presenting Christian personalities. I'll be presenting personalities from different religious traditions. So tonight we have two individuals from the Islamic tradition. As you can see, Tahireh and Abdul Ghaffar Khan. Has anyone heard of either of these two people? Probably not. Probably not. That's one reason I chose them. But they're well known in their own traditions. So let's start with Tahireh. Actually, her name, her full name, if you're interested, Fatima Baragani Umi Salimeh Tahireh. Tahireh means the pure one. So it was sort of a nickname that was given. She was born in 1815 in Kazim, which is, you can see on the map near, not far from Tehran, which is, of course, the capital. She was the oldest of four daughters of Muhammad Saleh Barghani. He was a Shia mujtahid. A mujtahid is a jurist, one who understands Islamic law and is involved in court cases. He was a very well-known Shia as opposed to Sunni. Remember, in Iran and Iraq, it's the Shia version of Islam that is dominant. And that's the version that holds that Ali should have been the rightful successor and the imams that followed him. I've said that a number of times. I don't... Okay. So, he was also known for the eulogies of the tragedy at Karbala. I don't know if you remember, but Shia hold the tragedy at Karbala very significant. That was where the Imam Hussein was martyred, killed by Sunni troops. And every year there's a major festival, even up until this day, in eulogizing the Imam Hussein. So her father was a jurist, and he was also known for writing these eulogies, which would be performed at these ceremonies every year to celebrate Karbala. Tahireh and her sisters all studied in his madrasa. You've heard the term madrasa? It's a school. It's an Islamic school that her father had established, which he included a women's section. Remember, we're talking about 19th century Iran here. Women are segregated in just about everything. It was even unusual. Probably if her father hadn't done this, she wouldn't have been able to attend this school. She was known for her ability to memorize the Quran, which she knew. She memorized the entire Quran, as well as being able to grasp some of the more subtle aspects of Shia theology. So she was really had a very good mind. She even surpassed her father's male students, which convinced him of her talents and led him to lament at the fact that she was not a son. That was the culture. He went so far as to let her to listen to his lectures, which he gave only to his male pupils, on the condition that she would be behind a curtain, sort of a public, a veil of sorts, and not let her presence be known. She was apparently also known for her beauty. We only have a few actual photographs of her, but lots of records of her beauty. One of the courtiers described her as moon-faced with hair like musk. One of her father's pupils wondered how it could be that a woman of her beauty could be so intelligent. The British professor of Iranian literature, Edward Granville Brown, who spoke to a great number of contemporaries when he was writing his famed book, said that she was renowned for her marvelous beauty. And the Shah's Austrian physician also cited her very good looks. So she was beautiful and intelligent, and as we'll see, a rebel. So her formal education ended at 14 when she was summoned by her father, what do you think for? To get married. To consent to an arranged marriage to her cousin, which was legal within Shia law. The marriage would result in 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter, but it was a very unhappy marriage. Her husband was reluctant to allow her to pursue her intellectual pursuits, even to leave the household. So it was at this time she first became acquainted with what was known as the Shaikhi movement. and started to correspond with one of its leaders, this gentleman, Sayyid Kazim Rashti. So he was the head of what was known as the Shaikhi movement, and that flourished in the Shia shrine cities of Iraq. Although she was born and raised in Iran, Iraq, which is right next door, is where the sacred shrines of the Shia are. Najaf, Karbala, these are the shrines, and this was where his headquarters were. Now, the Shaikhi movement was flourishing at the time because it placed great emphasis on the end times, the day of resurrection, and the return of the hidden imam. In Shia theology, there's the idea that the hidden imam who was raised up when he was a young boy will return, and there will be justice on earth. If you want a comparison, it would be something like the return of Christ. Okay. Very similar trope within Shia theology. The Shaykhis were teaching that the time of the end was near and that the hidden imam was about to appear. And like I said, he would be the redeemer of Islam and the ultimate savior of mankind. Rashti was gratified with Tahira's devotion and wrote to her. In his letters, he described her as solace of the eyes, another name, Korotolain. Initially, she kept her new religious beliefs secret from her family. This was sort of a radical movement within Shia Islam. However, she found it difficult to comply with her family's rigid religious doctrine. They were very conservative in their Shia Islam, and she began openly arguing with them, which women usually didn't do if they knew what was best for them. At these times, she defended the Shaikhi teachings as fulfilling numerous orthodox theological predictions. She was very well schooled in all these doctrines, so she could argue. And at times, her arguments were very strong, and I think that made the men feel even more intimidated, exactly. So she implored her father, uncle, and husband to allow her to make a pilgrimage to Karbala. This is the holy city in Iraq. You can see where it is there. It's just south of Baghdad. And that's the holy shrine of the Imam Hussein today, anyway. She wanted to go there. Like I said, this was the location where in 680 CE, Hussein was martyred by Sunni forces. So at the age of 26, Tahira, accompanied by her sister, made this trip to Karbala. Her real motive was to meet Rashti, the head of the Shaikhi movement. Okay. But by the time she had arrived, he had died. With his widow, so she lived with his widow for a while. And with his widow's approval, she stayed in the household where she taught his followers from behind a curtain. Okay, so if it'd be like you were the followers, there would be a big curtain here. You wouldn't be able to see my face, but you could hear my voice. And even that was considered radical for a woman to do, to be actually teaching men. But the Shaykhis were much more revolutionary, very liberal in terms of conservative Shia Islam. So in May of 1844, one of the Shaikhi followers, a certain Sayyid Ali Muhammad from Shiraz in Iran, but he was in Iraq, claimed that he was the Bab. Bab means door in Persian, B-A-B, it's like the door, or gate to the hidden Imam. He claimed to be connected to the hidden Imam. And Tahira accepted his claim and became his disciple. And she became what were known as one of the first 18 followers, known as the 18 Letters of the Living. This is the beginning of the Babi religion, which will be short-lived because we'll see why, but it will evolve into the Baha'i faith. So this is the forerunner of the Baha'is. So he claimed to have this connection with the hidden Imam, and in a later date claimed to be the Imam himself. It would be as if someone claimed to be the return of Christ. Very radical position. It's interesting. Most of these cultures will say that this is going to happen, but when someone actually makes the claim, No. It's always going to happen later.
So what happens to her children through all of this?
So it's an extended family. See, we think of nuclear families. If I went, she has cousins. It's a big family setting, so you don't have to worry about the children. Yeah, they'll be taken care of. It's the extended family rather than the nuclear family. So she accepted this, and she began teaching her new faith. But after some of the Shia clergy complained, the government of Iraq moved her to Baghdad to get her out of the holy city. But before leaving Karbala, she was stoned, but managed to escape. So she's taking on a very dangerous mission. But she was completely, I don't want to say infatuated because that doesn't sound spiritual, devoted to this individual known as the Bab. He apparently, from all accounts, had a very charismatic personality, which isn't unusual for people making these types of religious claims. So in Baghdad, she started making public statements challenging the Shia clergy. And in 1847, on instructions from the Turks, because the Turks controlled Iraq at this time, the Ottomans, she, and along with a number of other Babis, were deported back to Iran. So they deported her to get her out of the way. She arrived at the family home. Her uncle, her father, endeavored to reconvert her. But she argued with them and remained resolute in her new faith. Weeks later, her husband divorced her, and her uncle began publicly denouncing her. To be divorced, it really makes you an outcast. And all that was really required was for the husband to say, I divorce you. He would have said, I would divorce her because she's a heretic. In any case, so weeks later, as a divorcer, and after making public proclamations against the Bab, her uncle was murdered. And Tahira's husband blamed her, even though she denied any involvement. She was arrested, but her father convinced the authorities that rather than execute her, she would be kept in his home under house arrest. However, her ex-husband now pressured the authorities to put her on trial. The murderer confessed, but she was still kept under house arrest. But with the aid of one Mirza Hussein Ali, who would later be known as Baha'u'llah, founder of the Baha'i faith, he was originally a follower of the Bab, as she was. She escaped to Tehran. So she's escaped from her family to Tehran. Now, an escaped female heretic in Iran is not a good place to be. So what she wanted to do with a number of the other Babis was go to this place, MAKU. This was a prison in northern Iran, up in the mountains. Who was being kept there? The Bab. The Bab had been arrested as a heretic and sent to this prison. So she wanted to go there. Baha'u'llah discouraged her. Said, that would be very, very foolish, because you go there, you're done. So so the Babis are now, they're sort of on the run. They're being persecuted by the Shia orthodoxy and the government.
How many of them are there?
It was quite a big following. We'll see that there was close, probably by the time the Bab is executed, probably about 20,000 followers, which was big. The time was ripe for a new vision of Islam in Iran. The religion had become very stagnant, very conservative, not open to new ideas. We call it a messianic field when times are ripe for change. Generally, those who fill it, though, get persecuted by the orthodoxy. So what they did, the various Babis, they gathered together at a place called BADASHT. You see, it's the green. I know this doesn't shine very well. In the far eastern part of Iran. Why? No, they're away from any power base. So they're and they discuss what to do. The Bab's in prison. What do we do? And some said we should stay within Islam and reform it. Some said no, we had to break completely from it. So it was a major conference. But what was important there is she did this. She took off her veil in front of all the other Babi men. You want an equivalent? That would be almost like a woman walking in here naked, how it would be seen. And even some of the Babis at that point said, this is too much. Okay? But it became a symbol of what the Babi movement stood for, a complete break from Shia Islam. We're not just Shia reformers, this is a new religion. And it was at this time, interestingly, that Baha'u'llah gave her the title Tahare, the pure one, to sort of counter, the notion that she's some sort of harlot or something. So after the conference, nearby villages attacked the Babis and Tahare was captured. She was escorted to Tehran and put under house arrest in the mayor's house. In Tehran, she was presented to the Shah. Now the Shah is like the king, Shah in Shah. She was presented to him, and he was a very young monarch at this time. This picture is taken from a play that was later done, and I'll mention that. And he was reported to have remarked, "I like her looks. Leave her and let her be." The Shah then wrote her a letter in which he explained that should she deny the teachings of the Bab, she would be given a top position in his harem, his harem. That's a big offer. Okay. She rejected the request. Though a prisoner, she openly denounced polygamy, the veil, and other restraints on women. The clergy and members of the court tried to convince her to recant her faith. Instead, she claimed, "When will you lift your eyes towards the Sun of Truth?" Something that someone who thinks they have the truth usually wouldn't want to hear. So on July 9th, 1850, the Bab was taken to a courtyard in Tabriz and executed by a firing squad of 750 soldiers. Goodness. The reason there's more than one member of there's more than one member of a firing squad. You don't know whose bullet. So, but 750, kind of overdone. 2 years later, in their distress and anger, 3 Babis, in an act of revenge, attempted to assassinate the Shah. Not a good move. Not a good move. The plan failed and brought down upon the smaller Babi community acts of vicious reprisal. They were hunted down, basically. And a number of the leading mullahs blamed Tahare. She was told by a messenger of her upcoming execution. Baha'i tradition says she kissed the hands of the messenger, dressed in bridal attire, adorned herself in perfume, and said her prayers. She told the mayor's wife, "Weep not, the hour when I shall be condemned and suffer martyrdom is fast approaching." The mayor's young son accompanied to a place called the Ilkhani Garden. She gave him a silk white handkerchief with which she had chosen to be strangled. Her body was then thrown into a shallow well, and stones were thrown upon it. She was 35 years old. One of her most notable quotes is her final utterance, according to Baha'i tradition. "You can kill me as you like, but you cannot stop the emancipation of women." So in addition to her radical religiosity, she's remembered both in Iran and now worldwide as a renowned poet. Her poetry illustrates an impressive knowledge of Persian and Arabic literature, seldom seen in a woman in mid-19th century Iran. In many of her poems, she writes about her longing to meet the Bab. She never met him personally, because he had been arrested and sent to that. And that's one of the reasons she wanted to go meet him, but she never met him personally. One of the most famous poems attributed to her is named Point by Point, which is considered her signature poem and a masterpiece, and I'll read that to you. And remember, she's referring to the Bab here. "If I met you face to face, I would retrace, erase my heartbreak. Pain by pain, ache by ache, word by word, point by point. In search of you, just your face, I roam through the streets, lost in disgrace. House to house, lane to lane, place to place, door to door. My heart hopeless, broken, crushed. I heard it pound till blood gushed from me. Fountain by fountain, stream by stream, river by river, sea by sea. The garden of your lips, your cheeks, your hair, I wander there. Bloom to bloom, rose to rose, petal to petal, scent to scent. Your eyebrow, your eye, your face, somehow they tie me, trait to trait, kindness to kindness, passion to passion, love to love. While I grieve with love, your love, I will reweave the fabric of my soul, stitch by stitch, thread by thread, warp by warp, woof by woof. Last Tahireh searched my heart. I looked line by line. What did I find? You and you, you and you, you and you." When she was killed, more accurately murdered, hostile family members suppressed or destroyed many of her poems, but others were secretly spread across Iran. The British scholar Edward Granville Brown that I mentioned earlier procured her poems from various sources and published them in his book, A Year Amongst the Persians. In this poem, she excoriates the religious leaders of the time and those who persecuted her. While his eyes demolish a faith in vain, with you who condemn both love and wine for the hermit's cell and zealot's shrine, what can I do for our faith divine you hold as a thing of infamy? The tangled curls of thy darling's hair, and thy saddle indeed are thy only care. In thy heart the absolute have no share, nor the thought of the poor man's poverty. Alexander's pomp and display be thine, Alexander the Great. The dervish's habit and way be mine. That if it please thee, I resign, while this, though bad, is enough for me. Pass from the station of I and we, and choose for thy home non-entity. For when thou hast done the like of this, thou shalt reach the supreme felicity. So she's condemning the Shia leaders for being just pomp and just show and just formula. No heart. No heart. Recently, some scholars have claimed to have found several new poems that have been attributed to her. In 2008 and 11, English translations of earlier unknown poems were published, including a lengthy poem called Adam's Wish, about the desire of Adam, the biblical Adam, and all other past prophets to witness humanity's coming of age. In addition to being well known among the Babis, and the Baha'is now, who consider her one of the leading figures, her influence has spread beyond the Baha'i community as her life has become an inspiration for generations of feminists, as you might imagine. For example, Azar NAFIZI, I don't know if any of you have read any of her novels. She's a notable Iranian academic, well-known author, has referred to Tahira's influence, saying, "The first woman to unveil and to question both political and religious orthodoxy was a woman named Tahireh, who lived in the early 1800s, and we carry this tradition forward." This might interest you. The French actress Sarah Bernhardt asked 2 authors to write a play about Tahira for her to portray on stage. In 2008, she was portrayed in the novel The Woman Who Read Too Much. If you want to read about her in a novel, this was written in 2008. And in 2016, the Iranian filmmaker Shabam Touer, who lives in France, made an hour-long documentary about her life. So a very fascinating woman, very courageous woman to stand up, and a woman which a lot of people don't know anything about. If you're in feminist literature, you'd hear about her, or if you were really interested in poetry, that's where she's known, or if you were a Baha'i. Okay, the second individual is a gentleman by the name of ABDU'L Ghaffar Khan, born into a prosperous family in the Peshawar Valley of British India, today's Pakistan, near the Afghan border. His father was a landowner in the area. As a boy, he attended the British-run Edwards Mission School, did well in his studies, and was inspired by his mentor, the Reverend Frederick Wilgram, to see the importance of education in service to the community. In final year of high school, he was offered a highly prestigious commission in the Guides. This was an elite corps of Pashtun soldiers under the British Raj. This was one of the highest honors you could get as a Pashtun young man, an elite corps of fighters. But he refused the commission after realizing even guide officers were still second-class citizens in their own country, the British, okay. So he resumed his intention to attend university and went to this major university in northern India, ALIGARH University, which was founded by a Muslim intellectual. While he was there, he received a message from his father asking him to return home and be prepared to go abroad to qualify himself for engineering, since the Reverend Wingram had offered him the opportunity to study in London. Very big opportunity. But his mother wasn't willing to lose a son to London, so he refused to go. He began working on his father's lands while attempting to discern what more he might do with his life. He now turned his attention and his notion of helping uplift his fellow Pashtuns, which would remain an ideal for the rest of his life. Chris, I don't want to walk away. Can you read that up there so everyone can, who the Pashtuns are?
Yeah, also known as PAKHTHUNS. They are an extremely proud people comprising nearly 42% of Afghanistan's population, which is 11 to 12 million, and 12% of Pakistan's population, 18 to 19 million. The Pashtuns reside primarily in eastern and southern Afghanistan and the northwest frontier province of Pakistan and consists of about 608 different tribal groups. Their reputation as a fierce, independent, hot-tempered, bold, and fearless people is legendary. The name Afghan was given to the Pashtuns by their Persian neighbors and means unruliness or upheaval. Pashtun culture is expressed in the Pashtunwali, an unwritten, undefined code of ethics which lies at the heart of the Pashtun ethos.
Yep, so he decided he wanted to help the Pashtun people. When we think of Afghanistan, we probably think of the Taliban, right? And there are elements of the Pashtun who became Taliban. Very independent, very militaristic. They drove, it's often said, Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires. The British were defeated there. The Russians were defeated there. We were defeated there, depending on how you define defeat. But he wanted to he had this idea that they had this great spirit, but it had to be redirected. And that was his new life goal. So he saw the oppression of the British and the repression of the mullahs, the religious leaders. He saw that the people were oppressed by both of these. And an ancient culture of violence and vendetta prompted him to want to make things change by means of education. It was a culture that was definitely eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You hurt my cousin, I get your cousin. And a lot of that still remains today. But he saw this as, he wanted to try and help uplift this if he could. So at the age of 20, he opened his first school. It was a success, and he was soon invited into a larger circle of some of the more progressively minded reformers in Afghanistan. While facing great opposition from the mullahs, between 1915 and 18, he visited 500 villages in all parts of the district and was soon hailed as Badashah Khan, King of Chiefs. Eventually, his goal came to be the formulation of united, independent, secular India. Remember, although this is what we think of as Afghanistan today, this was part of British India. To achieve this end in 1928, he started a monthly journal in Pashto, the language, and founded a group known as the Khudai Khidmatgar, or the Servants of God, also known as the Red Shirts. So he founds this group. These efforts were aimed at teaching the Pashtuns industry, economy, self-reliance, by inculcating in them self-respect and fear of God that would banish all other fears. This was also founded on a belief in the power of Gandhi's Satyagraha, nonviolent engagement. So the Red Shirts always used nonviolence in their political activism. As he told its members, I am going to give you such a weapon that the police and the army will not be able to stand against it. It is the weapon of the prophet. Now he's referring to Muhammad, by the way, but you are not aware of it. That weapon is patience and righteousness. No power on earth can stand against it. And he went on to forge a very close spiritual and uninhibited friendship with Mahatma Gandhi. It's a lovely photo. And the two held a deep admiration for each other and worked closely together. The Red Shirts recruited over 100,000 members and became legendary in opposing British-controlled police and army, always nonviolently. This was the time under Gandhi's leadership when India is now trying to get its independence from Britain. His brother, Dr. Khan Abdul Jabbar Khan, led the political wing of the movement. And the organization worked cohesively with the Indian National Congress. This was the major political movement for trying to gain independence from India. Gandhi was very important in this movement, so was Nehru. Most of the Indian leaders who were working for independence, this was their movement. So his group worked closely with the Congress. And he became a senior and very respected member. On several occasions, when the Congress seemed to disagree with Gandhi on policy, because there were times when the Congress said, look, we've been beaten up enough. We got to fight back. Nehru was one. Ghaffar Khan always remained staunch ally of Gandhi. He always said, we have to do this nonviolently. Gandhi's theory was anything that's attained violently, because this was his idea of karma, will have violent ends. That's just how it works. That's how he saw reality. If you do something violent to get something, the karma that will flow from that will also be violent. In any case, so on April 23rd, 1930, Ghaffar Khan was arrested during protests arising out of Gandhi's famous Salt Satyagraha of 1930. In 1930, well, the British put a big tax on salt. And everybody in India used salt. So if you bought salt, you had to buy it from the government and pay a tax. Gandhi thought that was exploitative. And he led a Satyagraha movement where he actually walked over 160 miles from his ashram to the sea to illegally make salt and be arrested. That was called the Salt Satyagraha. And ABDU'L supported this, and he himself was arrested. And during that time, in a place called in Peshawar, that's the center of Afghanistan, one of its major cities, there's this place called the Storytellers Bazaar. A crowd of the red shirts had gathered there, and the British ordered troops to open fire with machine guns, killing about 250 people. The red shirts remained nonviolent. So in 1931, the Congress offered ABDU'L Ghaffar Khan the presidency of the party. But he refused, saying, I am a simple soldier of the red shirts, and I only want to serve. In October 34, when he went to Calcutta, the students of Bengal welcomed him, calling him the Frontier Gandhi. Addressing the gathering, he requested that they not call him the Frontier Gandhi, for he believed there should be only one Gandhi. He said, Gandhi is our general, and there should be only one general. So do not add the name of Gandhi to my name. I am not fit for the praise you have showered on me. Like Gandhi, he strongly opposed the partition of India. Does everyone understand what happened? It became apparent to the British that they were going to have to leave. They were going to have to grant independence. The problem was there was a Hindu majority, but a very active Muslim minority. And the Muslim minority was pushing for a partition. In other words, two countries to be formed, India and Pakistan. Gandhi opposed this, so much so that he said in a new government of India, we'll give every cabinet position to a Muslim. Some of the Congress leaders didn't like that. But they were opposed to partition because they saw down the line what that would result in. Well, it was partitioned, and at the time it was partitioned. The red is India. The green is Pakistan, but what do you notice? There's two green areas. Because initially there was one country, but in the middle was India. There was West Pakistan and East Pakistan. East Pakistan will later become Bangladesh when they revolt from Pakistan. But he was very much opposed to this. He and his followers felt a sense of betrayal by both Pakistan and India. He later said to the Congress, "You have thrown us to the wolves." So there was a referendum over this area. What happened is these various communities would vote whether they wanted to be with Pakistan or with India. This might have been one of the big political mistakes that Ghaffar Khan made. There was a referendum to be held here in this area, and they boycotted it. Now, if you boycott an election, who's going to win? The other guys. And they only won by a thin margin. Probably a political blunder. But in any case, so now we have two countries, India, Pakistan. Once Pakistan was created, Abdul Ghaffar Khan took an oath of allegiance to the new nation at the first session of the Pakistan Constituent Assembly. He pledged full support to the government and attempted to reconcile with the founder of the new state, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Jinnah had been the major leader of the Muslims in India. He was a very astute politician. He understood how the British operated. If it hadn't been for Jinnah, there probably would not be a Pakistan. But Ghaffar Khan, who was opposed completely to Jinnah's policies, said, "Okay, you've won. My allegiance is to the government." And they were supposed to have some follow-up meetings, but then rumors were spread that Ghaffar Khan was plotting to assassinate Jinnah. Highly unlikely. But that was enough for him to be now really made suspicions. Following this, he formed a new party, the Azad Party of Pakistan, which means the Freedom Party. The party pledged to play the role of constructive opposition. In parliamentary systems, that's what a party does. If you haven't won the election, you are in opposition, and you're supposed to work with the government. You don't rebel against it, but you're in opposition, the constructive opposition. And he said it will be non-communal in philosophy. That means we're not going to be overly Muslim. We're not going to support. We're going to be neutral. And but suspicions of his allegiance persisted, and shortly thereafter he was placed under house arrest. This was followed by what is known as the BABBRA massacre, which occurred in the northwest province of Pakistan, when unarmed workers of the red shirts were fired upon by the provisional government troops. Ghaffar Khan was released 6 years later, so he was kept under house arrest for 6 years, and stated that although there were those who doubted his loyalty, he remained loyal to the government. But he also called for an inquiry into this massacre. He was arrested again in 1956 for his opposition to a government scheme to merge the 4 provinces of West Pakistan into one unit for sort of gerrymandering. So he opposed that. I'm not going to go into the details. But he was arrested for that. He claimed to be in opposition to the government. He was released in 1957, only to be rearrested again in 1958. So what the government was pretty much doing was just shutting him down, until an illness in 1964 once again allowed for his release. Concerning his time under arrest, this is what he wrote. "I had to go to prison many a time in the days of the British. Although we were at loggerheads with them, yet their treatment was to some extent tolerant and polite. But the treatment which was meted out to me in this Islamic state of ours was such that I would not even like to mention it to you. In 1962, he was named Amnesty International Prisoner of the Year. Amnesty's statement about him said, "His example symbolizes the suffering of upward of 1 million people all over the world who are prisoners of conscience." In September of '64, the Pakistani authorities allowed him to go to the United Kingdom to receive medical treatment. That winter, his doctor advised him to go to the United States, after which he went into exile in Afghanistan, finally returning to Pakistan in 1972 to a popular response. Unfortunately, the prime minister at the time was ZULFQAR Ali Bhutto. I don't know if you know anything about Bhutto. And so they kept putting Ghaffar back in prison, back and forth. He had described Bhutto's government as the worst kind of dictatorship, which we know by the historical record what it was. In 1984, increasingly withdrawing from politics, he was nominated but did not win the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1985, he visited India and participated in the centennial celebrations of the Indian National Congress, and he was awarded the Jawaharlal Nehru Award for International Understanding and the Bharat Ratna, which is India's highest civilian award. His final major political challenge was against the Kalabag Dam project, fearing that it would damage the Peshawar Valley. So he was an environmentalist as well. His hostility would eventually lead to the project being shelved after his death, although it continues to be debated today and will likely take place. He died in Peshawar under house arrest in 1988 and was buried in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, according to his wishes. This was a symbolic move that would allow his dream of Pashtun unification to live after his death. The Indian government declared a 5-day period of mourning in his honor, not Pakistan, India. Tens of thousands of mourners attended the funeral, described by one commentator as a caravan of peace, marching through the Khyber Pass from Peshawar to Jalalabad. And what's ironic about that, if you know anything about Indian history, the Khyber Pass is the pass that leads from Afghanistan down into India. That's where all the warring tribes have come down to conquer, through that Khyber Pass. He's going back the opposite way in a march of peace. So, a ceasefire was announced in the Afghan war at the time to allow the funeral to take place. He was a champion of nonviolence, a heroic voice in a society dominated by violence. When you think of Afghanistan, you don't think of nonviolence. His unerring faith and bravery led to immense respect. Throughout his life, he never lost faith in nonviolent methods or in the compatibility of Islam and nonviolence. He always thought and taught that. He viewed his struggle as a jihad with only the enemy holding swords. He's fighting the battle without a sword. It's a jihad, it's a confrontation, but I don't carry a sword. That was his jihad. He left his people the following message: "O Pathans, your house has fallen into ruin. Arise and rebuild it. And remember to what race you belong, a proud race. The significance of his life for our own times was nicely summed up by Rajmohan Gandhi, no relationship to Gandhi. Gandhi's a fairly common name, actually. In his book, Badashah Khan and Our Times. This is what he wrote. Gandhi and Ghaffar Khan did not need to bomb people to teach them liberal democracy or civil restraint. Ghaffar Khan's life has a role in the radical rethinking by radical Islamists that many Muslim and non-Muslim voices are asking for. We saw that Ghaffar Khan, the Muslim, thought that prayer, in whatever language or form, was addressed to one and the same God. His daily life demonstrated this belief in the unity of humanity. We noticed the joy with which he showed the Buddha statues of Bamiyan. I'll say something about those in a moment. That the Taliban would later destroy. Comfortable with his Hindu friends, comrades, and colleagues, we saw that he also loved Westerners and Christians and was able to forgive his political foes. The naturalness of his Islam, his directness, his rejection of violence and revenge, and his readiness to cooperate with non-Muslims add up to a valuable legacy for our very angry times. Yeah, these were famous statues of the Buddha. They're immense. Can you see from the left the people standing next to them in an area of Afghanistan? When the Taliban took power, they brought out their artillery. That picture on the right is what is left. These great cultural gifts to humanity, blown away in a few instances. The very opposite of what ABDU'L Ghaffar Khan. So I think it's probably important that people know about this gentleman. And, you know, he was nominated for the Nobel Prize, worked with Gandhi, wonderful, and a Muslim. And that's what's important. Okay, that brings us to the end for today. Okay, well, thank you for coming out tonight. And next week, Albert will be back. Is he in town yet, Dorothy? Do you know?
Tomorrow.
He comes.
I think he got back today. He'll be back at church tomorrow.
Okay, he'll be back at church tomorrow, and we'll hopefully see you next week. I think he's doing Desmond Tutu next week, which is a good one. Okay, thanks for coming.
Thank you.